Hey, good morning. God's blessings to you. We are finishing John chapter 11. And this is after Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead. And now we're going to see how the Jewish leaders respond to that. And what ends up happening is you get one of the most profound prophecies in the entire Bible. And the ironic thing about it is the guy saying it really has no idea what he's saying. But nothing new. So let's read this story about Caiaphas and their great plot. So John 11:45. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he had did, believed in him. Great. You see a guy raise somebody else from the dead after he's been dead for 4 days, Lazarus. The proper response is belief. And it's not just this one sheer naked act that Jesus has done. You know, anybody can con you out of one thing, make you believe they did one miracle. But Jesus has been doing these signs over and over and over again. So the proper response, obviously, is faith. Now, this is why John writes his gospel, so that we would believe. But notice this, it says many of the Jews. So typically in John's gospel, that word, the Jews, refers to the Jewish leaders. Now, it's clearly Jesus' own ethnic people. John uses this term as irony because his own people ended up rejecting him. But right here we see that many of them, and this is probably many of the Jewish leaders, so maybe even some Pharisees. We see this with Nicodemus, who is going to be present at the burial of Jesus, who believes. They're starting to believe too. And so the higher ups now, really the upper ranks, the high priests, they start to go, uh-oh, this is really bad. Our own people are starting to believe in this guy. We need to do something. Verse 46, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So they go to the higher ups here, the Pharisees, and this is great because they're tattletaling. And what are they tattletaling about? It's the most ridiculous thing. Hey guys, he raised somebody from the dead. Well, gee, okay. Like what do you want me to do with that? Did he break any laws? And yet they are breaking the most fundamental law here, and that is, well, they're not going to support them anymore. They've really made themselves out to be a god. The whole thing is so petty. Verse 47. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council, and this is the Sanhedrin, and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs." Now think about that. What's the rational answer? Believe in him. That would be what we should do. And yet unbelief blinds us so much. This is how bad our sinful condition is. And so they say, nope, we can't believe in him. That's ridiculous. We can't do that. So now what are we going to do? Verse 48, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Oh no, everybody's going to believe. Everybody's going to go to heaven. How terrible would that be? And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. There you go. So there is a politically motivated element to this as well. You probably heard the term, Latin term, Pax Romana, means the peace of Rome. And the unique thing about Rome, and this isn't entirely unique, we see other groups do this with the Israelites in the Old Testament when they take them into exile. But Rome was really famous for once they took over a country, they let that country still run according to their customs as long as it didn't interfere with the peace of Rome. So the Jews were allowed to operate their temple, those kinds of things. In fact, Herod, who's king of this region, he's still got to answer to the Romans, but he remodels the second temple. I mean, it's essentially a rebuild. And so the Romans are cool with you kind of doing your own thing as long as it doesn't interfere with what the Romans are doing. And so the political motivation here is, well, if everybody starts worshiping Jesus, that's going to turn the world upside down. And then the Romans are going to start asking questions, and then they're going to not let us exist anymore. Of course, what ends up happening is the temple does get destroyed in 70 AD, but it's not because of the Romans. Now, it's the Romans who did it, but we read this, it's actually God's judgment for not believing in his son. So if they would have believed in his son, hey, maybe the temple's destroyed, but that's not that big of a deal anymore because you don't need the temple anymore. And so this often happens, classic political miscalculation. They think they should trust in the Romans rather than trusting in Jesus. Verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, and a little bit about Caiaphas, his father-in-law was Annas. And so you kind of have a dual high priestship going on here. Caiaphas is the official title holder. What happened, though, was his father-in-law, Annas, was the high priest. And the Romans actually came in and removed him from his high priesthood. And the Romans would do this from time to time. They tried not to interfere, but if it was very politically beneficial for them, they would step in. And so Caiaphas knows all about this political stuff. He knows his father-in-law is removed, and some of Annas' sons then held the title of high priest, and this would rotate around, and now it was finally Caiaphas' turn. So he knows about the political stuff going on. He said, "You know nothing at all." And I love Caiaphas' bluntness. Great rhetorical move. And notice this about Caiaphas. He doesn't really know what he's saying, but he's speaking the truth. And lots of prophets in the Old Testament had no idea what they were saying. A classic example would be Balaam. And Balak, king of the Moabites, hires Balaam to be his prophet. And what ends up happening is Balaam actually speaks what God would have him say. And he curses the Moabites. And Balaam's not a good guy. In fact, he gets brought up over and over and over again throughout the scriptures as being a wicked prophet. And yet God is able to use the mouth of a donkey, let the reader understand, because that's what happens with Balaam, to speak. So sometimes people are just merely vessels. It's much better if we know what we're saying, but God is able to use wicked prophets, wicked high priests to speak his truth. And that's who Caiaphas is. Of course, this is the ultimate irony, because Caiaphas thinks he knows what he's saying, but he really doesn't. But he says, hey, you know nothing at all, which is true, because if you don't know Christ, well, you don't know anything at all. You don't know the truth. Nor, verse 50, do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. There's lots of levels going on here. So first we have to discuss what Caiaphas thinks he means. Caiaphas thinks he's speaking politically. So what he thinks he's saying is, it's better for us if we kill Jesus. He's going to die, and in that way he's our substitute. Because if he dies, then the Jewish nation is spared from the Romans. That's what Caiaphas thinks he's saying. But you see the beautiful theology in this. This is actually a theological statement where Jesus dies in our place, and that's better. It's better for the Son of God to die than that the whole world should perish eternally. John 3:16, okay? We know it, we love it. Caiaphas doesn't understand that meaning of it, but this is substitutionary atonement that he's speaking of right here. Verse 51, he did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only. You see this? He died for the whole world. And not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Again, multiple levels. Caiaphas thinks he's speaking about all the Jews who are scattered throughout the world, the diaspora, the dispersion of all the Jews. He thinks Jesus is going to bring them all together into one. Of course, that's true. That's exactly what Jesus does. He unites people, just not in the way that Caiaphas thinks. He thinks Jesus is just a political figure. He doesn't think that he's the Son of God. Verse 53, so from that day on, they made plans to put him to death, because they think they're doing this politically. 54. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. So that's kind of the end of this section, and now we're shifting towards the beginning of chapter 12, here at the tail end of chapter 11. Just one more quick word about irony, about people saying something that's profoundly true, and they have no idea what they're actually saying. This shows up in Matthew's gospel during the Passion of Christ. And Jesus is on trial, and Pilate is asking them, you guys, you really want to put this guy to death? He's innocent. You want his blood to be on you? And they say, his blood be on us and our children. What they mean is, we don't care. Put his guilt on us. But you see the beautiful theology behind it. That's exactly the point. That's the only way that we are saved, is if Jesus' blood is on us and our children. Okay, lots of irony in the Bible. Okay, verse 55. Let's close out this chapter. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand. This is the third Passover in the Gospel of John, so chapter 2. And that's right after the wedding at Cana, when Jesus cleanses the temple during that Passover. Chapter 6. And this is when Jesus feeds the 5,000 and then tells us about the bread of life. Remember the Passover bread, so appropriate that Jesus would do that then. And then here, finally, tail end of chapter 11 into chapter 12. And then this last Passover, this is where the Lord's Supper takes place. And we'll point this out. John doesn't record it. You can go read John 6 about what John has to teach about the Lord's Supper. Instead, you get foot washing. We'll talk about that plenty when we get to John 13. But John's point is that Jesus is the Passover lamb. And we already knew that from chapter 1. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That's what John the Baptist says. Okay. Third Passover, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. You got to do this ritual purification before the feast. Of course, Jesus is the Passover lamb. The only way to be truly purified is from the blood and the water which flows from his side. And we're going to see that in John 19. 56, they were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, what do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all? You remember this discussion back in John 7? That was the Feast of Tabernacles, and they're all looking for Jesus and they can't find him. And he's not going to go up on their own will. He's going to go up according to his timeline. Same thing here. Some people think they can, manipulate the timeline, the scheduling of Jesus. Clearly, he's got his own divine time in mind. Verse 57, now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him. And this really sets up Judas's storyline into betrayal. All right, now we're all set for John chapter 12. We're going to look at the anointing of Jesus' feet and then getting to Palm Sunday, and then eventually the washing of Jesus's disciples' feet in chapter 13. And then we're just going to have a lot of fun because chapter 13 to 17 really slows down because that's all Maundy, Thursday. One day in those 5 chapters, and then extending into chapter 18 when he's arrested. All right, hey, God's blessings to you. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.